Happy noon, everyone. This is Jillian Graber from Protect PT, and we have some special guests today from FracTracker. Matt Kelso, the manager of data and technology for FracTracker, and Erica Jackson, outreach and communications specialist. And they've got some really great things to share with us today. So we're going to start by just kind of taking a little bit of time to get to know them a little bit. Matt Kelso has been with FracTracker Alliance since 2010. Matt maintains numerous oil and gas related maps and performs data analysis for FracTracker site. He also works extensively with other nonprofit organizations like ours in order to help them with their oil and gas related data and mapping needs. Matt is a graduate of Humboldt State University and has worked as an archaeologist and casino auditor in the past. He enjoys spending time with his family, learning about alternative energy solutions, and identifying anything that grows in his yard. So, welcome, Matt. Yeah, you have been our staple go-to for when we have mapping needs that we require. We have various maps that we maintain as well as an organization, and Matt's like our go-to there. And Erica Jackson supports FracTracker's communications and outreach activities through FracTracker's website, social media platforms, and outreach programs. Erica engages in the public in issues surrounding oil and gas development, and her work focuses on industry in the Ohio River corridor and is in partnership with other organizations in the region dedicated to fighting fossil fuel harms. Erica received a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from the University of Pittsburgh, right here in Pittsburgh. And during her undergraduate career, she completed research on environmental justice concerns regarding Pittsburgh's air quality and continued to research the region's air as a fellow within Pitt's Center for Healthy Environments and Communities. She also held various environmental education positions in Pittsburgh, California, Alaska, and enjoys engaging with people in their outdoor surroundings. So thank you guys for joining us today. I think we're going to have some interesting stuff to talk about today because, as I mentioned, FracTracker has a very unique set of information that they provide to residents and community members around the shale fields, and we always rely on the information that they provide in order to do the work that we do, and that really is supported by that. So first we want to talk about pipelines, and so do we want to go to the next slide and then start the discussion? And if folks have questions, you can go ahead and chat the questions, and we will post them up here for our guests to answer.
Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, and we wanted to talk about pipelines today. We deal with a whole range of issues dealing with oil and gas, but today we're talking about pipelines, and we're going to talk about the problems with the pipelines and also the problems with the pipeline data, because there are some of those as well that really have an impact on our overall understanding of what's happening beneath our feet. So this slide is just a brief overview of what we're going to be looking at. We're going to look at PHMSA incidents, and so that is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. It's a U.S. department. We're going to look at their incidents. We're going to look at Pennsylvania DEP, Department of Environmental Protection violations. And then we're going to take a look at issues around subsidence and how that might affect pipelines in the state, and focus in on Mariner East 2, and then just have a brief discussion about some of our resources that FracTracker has.
All right, great, thank you, Matt. And if we can go to the next slide. It seems like we're going to go over a lot of information that not only we on this side of the state can relate to, but also folks in the eastern part of the state. So I hope we have folks joining us from around the state. We definitely work with other organizations around the state, particularly on the marinreese project. So tell me a little bit about this table, Matt.
Okay, so this is from PHMSA, which is the federal agency that oversees pipelines. As you can see here, there's 138 pipelines since 138 pipeline incidents since 2010. These are really only major pipeline incidents that they look at, and in fact, for gathering lines, they estimate that there's only about 5% of gathering lines that report anything at all to the agency. So the data comes in 3 different reports, which is gas distribution. So that's looking at, all of the gas lines that go to houses or to commercial facilities and so forth. Transmission and gathering lines. Gathering lines take the gas from the wells to processing plants and compressor stations and so forth. And then transmission lines, which are generally, interstate lines that move gas long distances. And then everything liquid is in the hazardous liquids category. So that's, crude oil, it could be gasoline, natural gas liquids, so ethane, ethylene, propane, any of those kinds of things are all in the hazardous liquids category. So you could see that there's quite a few incidents that have happened since 2010. If you look at the last column, 138 incidents, 10 people have died from these, 25 people have been injured, 30 of these have caught fire, and 19 have exploded. So I think there's some, this is how the data was entered. So it sort of depends on how how they entered the data in the first place as far as what we see when we analyze it later. But these incidents, these 138 incidents, have resulted in $150 million of property damage as well.
And so, Matt, you said something that I think is really important for folks to understand, and that is how the data is entered. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So, I mean, that's when we're looking at data, that's always a limitation. It is somebody's job to put this data, onto a spreadsheet, to fill out a form, and the amount of care that they put into it has a big impact on, what it looks like when you analyze it later, or in fact, when you map it later, as we'll see a little bit later on. There's some issues with that as well. So it has a big impact. Like, for example, the explosion in the Revolution pipeline, which got a lot of attention here in Pennsylvania. That one, at least the last time I checked, I didn't look at that specific line yesterday, but the last time I looked at it, it was mentioned as a fire, but not an explosion. That's just how they entered the data. But it was absolutely an explosion. Every news article that you look at will mention the word explosion, and you can see photos of the blast radius and so forth. So there was definitely an explosion, but in the data set, it's not counted as that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it sounds like.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I pushed
No
twice. So it sounds like, that has a really big impact on what you guys can communicate to the community about what's actually happening in a lot of these circumstances. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I think it's a particular problem with pipelines. Pipeline data in particular is worse than other aspects of oil and gas data. Like, we can get most compressor station data, at least in Pennsylvania, through, the DEP air department. We can get the oil and gas locations. Nobody really publishes the pipeline locations at all. There are some that we have accumulated in recent years. We've digitized quite a few of them from, FERC documents or other sources that, show a PDF map, and so we sort of zoom in and try to put the pipeline where we think it is, and It's not perfect, but in in some cases that's the best you can get. Um, you know, there was an exception with marinreese 2, which was published by the Pennsylvania DEP, although I don't believe they have that published any longer. But they did a number of years ago. So yeah, pipeline data is notoriously spotty, I guess.
Yeah.
It's fair to say.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Matt. So tell me a little bit about the next chart you have here. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, so this is the same data as the previous chart, just arranged a different way, and this time we're showing it by operator. So of these major incidents that go to this federal agency, PHMSA, these are the operators that were involved. And you can see that some of them are involved quite a few times. Sunoco has 27 if you count the two different versions, Sunoco Pipeline and Sunoco Inc. Buckeye Partners has 18 violations or 18 incidents. These aren't just violations, they're incidents of one form or another. And Peoples Natural Gas has 10. So this chart just displays all the operators that were involved.
Thank you. And so if anybody has any questions about the data that Matt and Erica are going to present today, please let us know in the chat. So we'd love to hear from you and see what questions you may have. So if we'll go ahead to the next screen, tell us a little bit about this map.
Okay, so I had mentioned that we have copied quite a few pipeline routes in the past few years. The ones that we have for Pennsylvania are here in purple. The pipeline incidents from PHMSA are in the three colors for the three different reports. So the gas distribution lines are yellow, transmission and gathering lines are red, and hazardous liquid lines are black. I left some bad data on here on purpose. So you can see that there's a couple of dots. You can see there's one north of Lake Erie and one near Frederick, Maryland. Those are Pennsylvania incidents, but the coordinates that they provided for it were bad. So there's another one in New Jersey that's not on this map because I zoomed in too far for that one. But it's just always good to realize that bad data is always a part of the story. And in this case, I've left these on the map for that purpose.
Yeah, that's interesting to see that when you're do you know why that is? Is it because it's the way that they're inputting the data into is it like a spreadsheet or something like that? Do you know how they do that?
Yeah, it's in a spreadsheet. So there was a major incident, I believe it was in Altoona, a number of years ago, where there's a fatal pipeline blast, and the coordinates for that at one point showed up in Greenland, and it was just a matter of mixing up the latitude and longitude values, or mixing up the whether or not there's a negative in the value, or if the value is positive, things like that. Or in some cases, I suspect that the one in the one that shows up in Ontario is probably just an error in the latitude. It's just off by a couple of degrees. I'm not exactly sure where the actual location was, but I think it was just a data entry error.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Matt, I should probably know this, but are these incidents for pipelines that are online, or does it construction count?
I believe these are all online because they all involve a release of some sort or another. So for that to be the case, I think they're all online. So there's no, for example, I know, Erica, you're going to be talking about things like inadvertent returns later on. There's none of those in this data set.
So it sounds like there's a lot of missing data, and I think that that's a really good point, Erica. I'm glad you asked that question because I think it seems like it's a reoccurring theme that not all the data's in the same place. Sometimes it's incorrect, and sometimes it's hard to find. Would that be fair to say that, might make your job a little harder?
Yeah,
it's why we have a job. We wouldn't have a job if it were like super clear and available to the public.
That's a good observation. What about the next slide? This is a really big table. I don't know if everybody's going to be able to see it as clearly. Patrick, would you mind going to the next? There we go. Thanks. Tell me a little bit about this.
So this is a really big table. We're definitely not going to go through it line by line. These are violations for pipelines from the Pennsylvania DEP, or at least the ones that I could find. So I downloaded all of the violations since 2010, and this is for all kinds of oil and gas operations. There were about 55,000 violations. These are the ones that I could identify as pipelines. And the way I did that, there's no way to filter the data and say this is a pipeline violation or this is a this is a well site. So what I did was I looked for some key terms in the operators' names. So they all have one of the three: pipeline, midstream, or gathering, one of those three words. Plus there were a handful of operators that I knew were involved in pipelines in the state that I also added just because I happen to know about them. But there's really not a systematic way to get this. And then once you do get it, there's no way to map it. Some of them can be mapped by municipality. So you could just like say, this municipality has 36 pipeline violations or something like that. I didn't do that because there were thousands of records that had no location information whatsoever. So it didn't even tell you what county it was in. So I couldn't put it on the map, and since there were so many, to say like, okay, well, not to pick on Penn Township, but if Penn Township had 37 pipeline violations, and then there were thousands of additional pipeline violations that we don't know where they were, there's a good chance that that's significantly understating how many violations occurred in that location, right? Yeah. So that's the situation with violations from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. So the ones that I found, there are 5,772 of them. This doesn't include any of the marinreese ones for some reason. I'm not really sure why I couldn't find them in that data set at all. But it does include some other subsidiaries of the same parent company, which is Energy Transfer. If you look in this first column, kind of toward the bottom, one of these numbers might jump out at you. It says ETC Northeast Pipeline LLC, and there's 4,352 violations. It's a staggering total for one operator, and it's a huge fraction of the total for the whole data set. Almost all of those, about 4,200 of those, were for the Revolution pipeline and for the shenanigans that went on there. So there was really quite a lot of enforcement activity around that. I think a lot of it was focused around the fact that they were removing stream beds and other things that were just stupid, and obviously contributed directly to the massive explosion that happened there. So the same company, same parent company anyway, does the Mariner East, but the Mariner East pipelines aren't in that report for some reason, although they are on a different part of the DEP website. So a little bit of a sloppiness going on there.
And I don't know if you have a slide of how many violations there are for the Mariner East pipeline. Are we going to talk about that or no?
Well, I did count them on the DP has a pipeline portal page, and I copied them all and posted them into Excel and counted them, and there's 115 of them. So And not everything that happens is going to result in a violation either. I mean,
Right.
I think maybe Erica can talk about some of that stuff later on as well. But there are incidents in the field that don't rise to the level of a violation.
Great. So if we can hop to the next screen. Oh, I think we missed one. Can you go back one? Thank you, Patrick. All right, so.
Right, and so this slide is just, obviously we've talked about all of the violations. It's a very sloppy industry. Many of these operators don't seem to really care too much about what kind of impact they have. They're just getting their job done. It seems like that to me anyway. But I think it's also a fundamental question of, is it even possible for pipelines to operate safely in this area? And there's a good reason to suggest that maybe it's impossible. Maybe all of these, or not all of these, but maybe many of these violations are going to happen anyway, just because there's so many issues with ground movement in the area. And in Pennsylvania, we don't have a whole lot of seismic activity. But what we do have is a lot of coal mines. And in fact, this is not all of the coal mines in the state. These are just the ones that have been digitized by DEP's offices. And we also have a lot of karst. And karst is a limestone or similar rock formation that is soluble. So it can dissolve through acid rain or what have you. Carbon dioxide has a big role to play in that, but you get underground caverns or just really unstable rock formations, and that can really be a leading cause in subsidence issues. When you're talking about a pipeline, and you have pipelines that have a huge amount of hydrocarbons under high pressure crossing through all of this stuff, it almost seems inevitable that there's going to be problems.
Yeah.
So obviously some of these operators are sloppier than others, though.
And for us here in Penn Township and surrounding communities here in Westmoreland County, back in 2016, folks might remember that there was a large explosion of a pipeline through Texas Eastern, a unit of Spectra Energy, and this was a large pipeline that was quite old. I think it was 50 years or more old, and what I had initially asked the question when they had their first meeting after the incident had happened, which caused major damage not only to property, but one gentleman lost a leg and an arm and was severely injured. He's lucky to be alive. And so, that kind of raised a lot of questions about, what the operator was doing to ensure the safety of the pipeline. This was an older pipeline, it had been around for 50 years. And so these aging pipelines, there are, things that are in place to make sure that, checks and balances to make sure that the pipeline is inspected. And, I had asked the question the last time they ran the PIG, which is like the inline tool that they can use to see if there's any corrosion in the pipeline, did they find anything? And they said, oh, no, we didn't find anything. But then a couple months later, they had another follow-up meeting after their final report came out. And they said, well, actually, we did find something, but we were not expecting the soil in Pennsylvania to have periods of such drought and then such wet saturation. And that kind of told me that this Texas-based company didn't really have an idea of the type of soil that they were inserting the pipeline into. So that to me seemed like it was really just egregious, and that it was avoidable, that this poor man that had lost a lot in his life, it could have been avoided had they just known what the soil conditions in Pennsylvania are. So I think that really speaks to what you're talking about here with, just the different types of conditions that we have that are unique, and that somebody should be looking at the plans to make sure, whether it's the engineering plans or what, to make sure that the operators that are not from Pennsylvania know what the heck they're doing, putting these explosive gases underneath our feet. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I think I mean that's a tragic story for sure. I would also say that pipelines are almost literally everywhere. In the United States, there's about 2.8 million miles of pipelines, which is enough to go to the moon 11 times. So it's really just staggering how many pipelines we have. And if care isn't put into them, you might not have an issue the first year. You might not have an issue after 10 years. In this case, it took 50 years, as you said, for this to happen. But it's a huge problem, and it's we need to pay a lot more attention to it.
Yeah, and maybe Erica can speak to this, but how do you make sure that the public is aware that these pipelines exist underneath their feet, especially if they've been there for 50 or more years? Because the gentleman that lived in this house certainly did not know that he lived so close to a pipeline that could potentially explode.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to take that question, but I mean, I think that's where the role of so many nonprofits and groups like yours and groups like FracTracker have kind of come into that space, because state regulators and the energy companies themselves aren't really providing that information, and that's where we come in. And so I'll talk about our resources that can kind of help people fill that knowledge gap. And the other thing I just wanted to say about your comment, Jillian, is that speaking about changes in soil, is that this is really a growing concern with climate change. In Pennsylvania, we're already seeing drier summers, more extreme heat, and then heavier downpours, heavier rain. And so that change in soil can lead to change in climate can lead to more landslides, probably worse conditions for installing pipelines. And it's I don't know, ironic isn't the word, but it's like the companies causing climate change, the oil and gas companies, are hurting themselves because their infrastructure is really being negatively impacted.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Erica. Thank you for saying that. And so I have a comment from someone in the audience, Laura Snyder. She says ME1 is 90 years old. So we're talking about an old pipeline. And I believe talking with folks around Mariner East, and maybe this is going to come up today again, but they characterize it or have a name for it called Frankenpipe. And that to me seems a little scary when you're talking about something that's carrying highly explosive gases, that it's kind of old and cobbled together, old pieces and new pieces. And to me it seems like something that important and that hazardous would I don't know, require something better than a cobbled together old pipe. That's just me, but
You're 100% right. I mean, and just think about what has changed above ground since, it was installed a century ago. New homes, new schools, new infrastructure has been built around it. It's going through pretty densely populated neighborhoods, and it wasn't designed to carry natural gas liquids either. So it's highly concerning. And I'm gonna talk about the Mariner East. So I guess we can transition.
yeah.
I think the Protect PT audience is probably pretty well informed about this pipeline. Actually, this pipeline has gotten a lot of attention, so it's brought in a lot more people into the debate around oil and gas issues. So I won't bore you too much with background, but just in case you're not familiar with this project, this map kind of shows what's happening. So the pipeline route is in yellow. It's part of a larger Mariner East pipeline system. And the purple dots here on this map are fracked or unconventional wells in Pennsylvania. So those wells are extracting methane for energy, but they're also, especially in the southwest corner of the state where we are, they're extracting natural gas liquids like ethane, propane, butane. And those can be used to, those can be converted into petrochemical products like plastic. And that's where the marinreese 2 pipeline comes in. So this, we're not talking about energy, we're talking about plastic. So the natural gas liquids will flow from the west part of the state to the east part, and then they'll be exported to Europe to be manufactured into plastic, petrochemical products. And yeah, like I said, this project has gotten a lot of attention because it's going through really dense neighborhoods, it's going near schools, and it's not, again, for to serve our energy needs. It's basically for the profit of, you know, the corporations that are going to make money off of producing plastic. So FracTracker has done a lot of mapping around this pipeline, especially kind of when it came on people's radar a few years ago. We mapped schools and population data and watershed impacts. I say we, but I wasn't at FracTracker, so I can't take that credit. But and all of that is available on our website still, if you're interested in looking through those maps. And then when construction began, pretty soon, you know, problems started popping up very quickly. And a lot of those issues had to do with the installation of horizontal directional drills. So this is a method of installing pipelines. Like Matt was saying, there's pipelines all around us, and I don't think people really realize they're like going under roads and under rivers, and you can't just, you know, dig a trench through all of those resources. So what operators will do is they bore horizontally beneath a road or a neighborhood, and then they pull the pipeline through. It's called a horizontal directional drill, or HDD. And that process uses thousands of gallons of drilling fluid. And that can spill into the environment pretty easily. And it can go into streams and ruin wetlands, and it can impact groundwater, and it can ruin well water. It can go into surface water, streams and lakes. It can go into coal mines. And then cause, you know, mine drainage, and it can wreak a lot of havoc. And with the marinreese 2 pipeline, there are over 200 HDDs, I believe. So they're really using this, they're really depending on this process. And I think that's largely because it's impacting so many sensitive resources they can't trench through. But even though it's perceived as kind of the safer pipeline installation method, it's not been safe at all with this project.
Yeah. And it looks like, you know, you have some great statistics on this slide on my screen over here, but they're not up on the screen.
Oh yeah,
At.
You just need to click one more, Patrick. It's like a effect.
Oh, cool. Yeah, thank you, Erica.
Yeah, I did that for the drama of so I just updated this data. So this is freshly analyzed. And this map is now available on our website. And I shared that link with Mary, I think, if she can put it in the chat, or if you go to fractracker.org, it should be on our front page. So so we've mapped inadvertent. So another name for these drilling fluid spills is inadvertent returns. So we've mapped these inadvertent returns before, but I just updated it, and I found, so since construction began in April 2017, there have been 320 of them, and about half, 147, have gone into waterways. So a disclaimer here, and it's kind of something that Matt has already touched on, is that this data is only as accurate as Sunoco or Energy Transfer, they've merged, is reporting it. So we know, for example, there was this incident at Raystown Lake where hundreds of thousands of gallons were spilled, and millions went underground, but then more surfaced in the lake, and they didn't report that right away. So that could be an issue here, and we found that to be an issue with other pipelines, like with the Falcon pipeline as well. So those incidents have released between 344,000 and 590 gallons and 405,990 gallons. So a lot of the spills are reported as ranges. That's kind of the minimum that's been released into the environment. So there's about 28 or so that had no volumes reported. So that's the minimum amount that's been spilled, and over 250,000 gallons have gone into our waterways. Again, that's really important because that can ruin the function of wetlands, which are so vital for a healthy ecosystem. It can have adverse impacts on aquatic wildlife. It can ruin a drinking water source. It's not as harmless as the industry likes to convey. And another thing I found was that since Pennsylvania entered a state lockdown, there have been 36 inadvertent returns. So while Pennsylvanians are, sheltering in place, trying to protect our health, dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of health concerns, a lot of economic concerns, Sunoco has continued to cause issues. And so that's been over 10,000 gallons spilled since the pandemic began. And so I would definitely encourage you to check out this map on our website because it's interactive and you can click on things. And you can also, if you see at the top, there's these gray squares and one of them is a clock, and you can click on that and to see the inadvertent returns, like a timeline of them appear. And you really get a clear picture that Sunoco has not learned its lesson. They just continue having spill after spill after spill. And it demonstrates that this company is not, as long as it's doing construction, it's not going to be, it's going to be impacting residents. Yeah. And I also added on here mobile app reports. So I'll talk about our app later, but these are places where residents that have downloaded our app submitted data. Again, so you can kind of get a picture of what it's like on the ground and see photos that people have submitted.
That's great, Erica. And so I wanted to mention too, so because of COVID and everything that happened, we were getting some emails and calls and texts from residents that lived near the pipeline that were, reporting that the workers were still continuing to work and still, this was considered an essential, service to get plastics overseas. So we have lots of photos that are on our Halt Mariner Now website of, these workers that were not following guidelines that were set aside from the, by the governor. And so we actually ended up writing a letter to not only the governor, but other folks, within the DEP to just to bring light to this, because it was really unfair that everyone had to shelter in place. And in some cases, we had one resident reporting jackhammer every single day, and just to have to live around that, it's pretty exhausting to have to live around something like that when that this pipeline should have been done a long time ago. And the reason why it's not is because the plan was very poorly concocted from the first. And for them to be able to keep working when everyone else is sheltering in place, and then impacting people more because they are sheltering in place, it just compounds one after another issue with this particular pipeline. And I put up the link, actually Mary put it in the chat for everyone, and I popped it up on the screen. So you guys can check out the FracTracker site that talks about, dozens of spills during the lockdown. And we do have one question that I wanted to address from someone, Billy, who's watching, is asking about, are there any universities involved in mapping the different aspects of the Mariner East, soil scientists, ground penetrating radar folks? So I don't know if anybody can talk about that a little bit, or if you guys know anything about that.
I guess my answer is I hope so. I hope there's um, academics who are trying to look for incidents or even identifying old pipeline routes in some cases. If they are, this is not data that we have. So if someone has that data and they'd like to make that available to the public, we can certainly work with them to make that happen. Yeah, I mean, I think in some cases, well, with the marinreese is where the route is. In some cases, you really don't. I mean, honestly, the best you can do is look at like Google Images or Google Maps and try to find the pipeline cut in the trees. Things like that. That's what you can do. Some people have access to the exact data. They just don't share it. I mean, this is most of this stuff. I'm not sure if all of this stuff, but most of this stuff is known to state regulators, or in some cases county emergency managers and so forth. My understanding is that they don't have a full idea of where everything is, but they have a lot of stuff that we don't have access to. They always talk about pipelines, and the reason they don't make it more available is they talk about it as a public security risk. In the wake of 9/11 and so forth, they wanted to make those kinds of assets secret. It seems really inconsistent though, because we know where all the wells are, we know where the the gas plants are, we know where the ethane crackers are, and all of these other things. But to make the pipelines secret seems inconsistent. And I would say further, we've looked at the incident data, and one of the leading causes of pipeline incidents is excavation. This is when people don't know that the pipeline is there. So honestly, keeping the awareness of the pipeline routes, making people aware of them, would increase public safety quite a bit, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Matt. We have a bunch of comments here. It seems like people in the East who are living through this right now are coming to join us. So thank you guys for joining us. I know PK has been putting up some comments, and she does a lot of the kind of on the ground watchdogging, for Mariner East. And thank you so much for doing that, because that gives us more information when people on the ground are gathering that information as well. And then Laura Snyder says they are doing HDD for Mariner East to stay in the old easements, so ET did not need to procure new easements, all for their convenience and the cheapest route. And that seems like a pretty shoddy job to do something just for the quickest and easiest and cheapest way, which seems to be a common theme for this particular industry. Do things as quickly and cheaply and dirty as possible to make as much profit as possible, and really not taking care with something that's such a risky business. So I'm going to keep popping the comments up in the screen because there's a lot of great ones. And Erica, if you wouldn't mind talking about the next slide a little bit.
Yeah, those are all both great points. And I've been really inspired seeing all of the protests and brigades, and I follow it all on social media. So and try and share it out through FracTracker's channels too. So keep it up to everyone on the eastern part of the state. So talking about things that have occurred during lockdown, the most significant incident is here in Chester County at Marsh Creek Lake. So back in August, about a month ago, there was another inadvertent return at an HDD site. Again, there were alternatives to this route, but I guess it was the quickest path through that Sunoco chose, and 8,163 gallons were reported to be spilled. into a wetland and streams, which if you can see, they're kind of really small on this map. At the HDD site, the wetland is in green, and then there's this blue stream. It caused a subsidence event, and the drilling fluid spilled into impacted groundwater, and it spilled into the lake, which is a drinking water reservoir. Again, jeopardizing ecosystem and public health during a pandemic. And so now I believe 33 acres of this is also a state park. So I know personally I've been going to a lot more state parks during the pandemic just because, can't do much indoors. And it's definitely provided solace for me, and I think a lot of other people. And now a huge section of this state park is closed down from Sunoco's negligence. And containment and cleanup efforts are underway. But this is something that probably came as a surprise to no one, because the parallel 16-inch line here experienced inadvertent returns when it was installed back in 2017. There are hundreds of public comments of people saying, please don't install it here, but they did anyways. And so now there is a reroute planned. And if you go to the next slide, so there's a description of this reroute that the DEP is ordering Sunoco to now take, which is in the dashed yellow line, I believe. This is just kind of a general path I think it'll take based on this description that they provided, crossing under the turnpike and then crossing over, the turnpike is kind of in orange, and then crossing over a little Conestoga Road and back to the route. So this is a guesstimate of that reroute, and it's pretty significant. So the DP has definitely not fulfilled its duties of regulating this pipeline, but it's pretty significant that it's ordering this reroute. It will be another delay. That Sunoco's facing more fines. They'll need new easements to change to this route. Okay, next slide. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, and if people have more questions about marinreese, I'm happy to go back to that afterwards, but just about our website, for people who aren't familiar, we have a ton of resources, not just about pipelines, but wells, oil and gas waste, abandoned wells, air pollution, all of that. So one of the most frequently requested or frequently used services that we provide is just a map of fracked wells. And I wanted to make sure everyone here knew how to access that for Pennsylvania. So if you go to our website, fractracker.org, and then go to maps, and then click state by state, you can find our Pennsylvania page, and you'll see a ton of Pennsylvania resources, blog posts and maps. And then next slide. And then, excuse me, you can access our Pennsylvania Shale viewer. I think that's another link that I sent to you guys to share out, but it should be pretty easy to find on our website on that Pennsylvania page. And so we maintain this map. As you can see, it looks like Matt just updated it 8/28. So we maintain it pretty frequent. We update it pretty frequently. So these are all the unconventional wells in the state. And then another important thing is we list or we map the violations that they've received. So if you want to see if a well near you has incurred any violations, you can go to our website and then click on the little yellow circles where there are violations, and then a pop-up box will appear. You can use the arrows to click through if there's a ton of violations and see if there's any issues at those wells. Again, this is publicly available data, but it can be hard to find and access, and that's kind of where we come in to try and make this all a little bit more accessible.
And it seems like a lot of folks online are talking about, loss of water. PK had said in 2017, the same thing happened, that they had 42,000 lost, and the aquifer was impacted. My neighbor finding E. coli in wells, and that Marsh Creek serves 1.75 million people's drinking water source. So that's a pretty difficult thing when you have folks that are depending on this water in this creek for their drinking water, and now it's been contaminated. And I know that ETP was fined, but is that fine going to adequately cover all of the damage that has been done? Do you guys have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, generally these fines are kind of just a drop in the bucket, as they say. They're not, I mean, first of all, if you lose your well water, you lose your well water, and that can really, then you're drinking, then you need plastic water bottles, you know, to get all your in delivered to you or buy it. And there's so many people across the state in that situation. I know Matt can probably talk about his own well. And so while Sunoco has been fined a lot, and I imagine that their shareholders and everyone isn't too happy about what's happened, it's not nearly enough to rectify the nuisance, the stress, the damage to ecosystems, the damage to drinking water, everything else that I'm sure people in the chat are commenting on. It's really unacceptable. And Sunoco has just repeatedly demonstrated that they're not good at this. And they're also, of course, the operators of the Revolution pipeline, which exploded in Beaver County, and the Dakota Access pipeline. So I think they're really putting a black eye on the pipeline industry, and that's probably well deserved.
Yeah, and PK is saying that there were 42,000 gallons of fluid lost and never found, and that DEP is ignoring empirical data and not checking on the data the company submits, that they are starting to sue those who claim that they didn't do their checks and balances research. So, I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning when we were talking about, these companies from out of state coming in and not doing the research on the ground that they're going to be putting their pipeline in. Who knew that Pennsylvania had wet and dry soil? I don't know, all of Pennsylvanians, obviously not someone from Texas. And, who knew that we had underground mines? We did. So you would think that the DEP would know this as well, and that they would be doing the checks and balances, but clearly they are not. And that is a whole nother topic altogether that I could go into. But I appreciate all of the comments here. I'm gonna just keep popping them up on the screen because I think they're also relevant. And I have one question: is there a map of lawsuits related to fracking in the state, both brought from the community and also brought by the DEP and companies? That's actually something that we talked about earlier this week, and I don't know if we had a chance to talk to FracTracker about it, but that's something that we were thinking about, given all the stuff that's going on.
I mean, that's a fantastic question. We don't have a map of all the lawsuits. It would be great to see that. It would be great to see that data. If anyone has has been compiling them, all the various lawsuits, I'm sure this would include things like where DEP, sued the township in Indiana County for trying to ban injection wells there. Things like that are just out of hand for regulators to be suing communities over. It would be a fantastic data set. We don't have that, but I'd be interested in working with someone if they wanted to build that.
Yeah. And Billy also asks, are there initiatives to get baselines for wells across the state? I think that she's talking about baseline well tests, water tests. And so the company is required to do baseline water tests before activity starts. Unfortunately, many of the records of folks' water being contaminated has been covered up by the DEP, or it was not properly reported, and that is a whole story that Public Herald started working on, several years ago. And so if anybody wants to go to their website, Public Herald, you can just Google them, and unfortunately, again, it seems like data is important. It's important to people. It's important to people in the community. And it's certainly important for you guys to get it out there to help us be able to know what's going on, because the data is the information that's important to us. And so we have another question. It would be wonderful if we could map the well contamination and aquifers hit a huge problem, I know. Yeah, for sure. And do you want to talk a little bit about, Erica? Do you want to talk about the app, the FracTracker app?
Sure. Yeah. I think that's kind of the last thing I have. And then actually one thing that PK's point brought up is fluid loss that's underground that doesn't surface. That's a huge issue. Sometimes it's referred to as loss of circulation, and that's not reported in the same way that an inadvertent return, which returns to the surface, is reported. So we discovered this same thing looking into the Falcon pipeline, that so a lot of that drilling fluid, because they're drilling underground, it's just released underground, and then kind of who knows where it goes. That's a concern when you have karst, when you have coal mines, when you have conventional wells, all these holes in the ground that could be spilling into creating subsidence issues that it's much harder to get data on. That would probably require a right to know request.
Mm-hmm.
But the last thing I have, the next slide, I think, maybe. Oh, oil and gas drilling 101, also something just I wanted to highlight on our website. If you're confused about the fracking process, check that out. And then also you can go to the topics tab and choose the topic that you're interested in. And we have lots of different resources on petrochemicals, plastic, air pollution, environmental health concerns, all of that. And the next slide. So we also have an app which has two main features. One is a map of wells and pipelines, and this is really valuable to kind of what we were talking about earlier, just getting people to realize how many pipelines and how many wells surround us. It's really eye-opening to see that all mapped out. And with the app, it can access your location if you give it permission. We're not, we're not Facebook trying to track you, but if you give it permission to use your location, it puts, it pins where you are in relation to all of this infrastructure and compressor stations and processing stations. So it's a great educational tool. And then there's also a feed of oil and gas activity that users submit. You can submit what you see to help us ground truth data. Like we said, sometimes data is inaccurate. And also to submit information about your own experience, what you're seeing, impacts you're seeing, noises you're seeing, things like that. And so that was helpful for making, the marinreese 2 map. I uploaded some of the marinreese 2 reports just to give people an idea what's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. I think that's all I had. Did I have another slide?
No, I think that was your last one. And yeah, so Laura says that it's crazy that loss of drilling fluid underground does not count as a spill unless it services. I didn't know that too. That's really interesting. And then if folks want to go to the FracTracker app, we've been sticking up here some different links for everyone. But but I actually use the FracTracker app occasionally, and we're looking at we've been working on our own app for a little different purpose with our air and noise monitoring programs, and used the FracTracker app as kind of like the benchmark of what we'd like to obtain, and then some extra stuff that it doesn't have that we'd like to put in there for our purposes as far as the monitoring that we do. So it's a really helpful tool, and I would encourage everyone to download the app if you live near this type of oil and gas infrastructure, whether it's fracking or pipelines. And because this is connecting us as a state. This connects us throughout our state, these different types of infrastructure. And it's important that we say something when something happens, because otherwise it might not get reported. And that's a big problem, especially when the agency that's supposed to do that is not doing it, sometimes accurately enough to get the data out there to the folks that want to have that data. So then I'm just going to keep popping comments up. This water issue is a really big issue for people, as it should be. Water is,
100%.
is an essential human need that you would think would be more protected. If you go ahead to the next slide, we're going to have one more virtual lunch hour next week. Oh, great. We have, we went to, okay. So we're going to have a virtual lunch hour next week. We're actually going to be talking about radon, and we're going to have a special guest talking about radon. But if you like the lunch hours, I would really encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you get the newest lunch hour right in your updates. And also, if you want to do our survey, and actually this picture on the survey, the bit.ly keeps getting cut off. It's just PPT lunch hour, and you can fill out the survey and let us know how you think we're doing with the lunch hours, because we would like to continue them. We're going to take a little break after next week, and then we're going to come back around the holidays just to give you some updates on things, and then probably not until 2021 are we going to come and see you every week like we have been. But it's been a really important thing for us to bring you information like Erica and Matt have given us today. We think it's really important. Also, if you'll go to the next slide, to follow on social media, follow FracTracker on social media. There's their handle, and then also Protect PT on social media. And I would even add to that, there's a Halt Mariner Now, since we're talking about the Mariner East, there's a Halt Mariner Now website as well, and it's just haltmarinernow.org. And so you can keep following information that's going on about the Mariner East pipeline. And if you'll click to the next screen, which is the last one, and so radon awareness in the home. So that's what we're going to talk about next week at noon, and that'll be our last lunch hour for a while. I want to thank everyone tuning in, and with your wonderful comments and questions. Thank you so much. This is a really important topic. And also thank Matt and Erica from FracTracker for joining us today, because the essential work that you do helps us get the information that we need, not only as an organization, but as residents that live near these different types of infrastructure. So thank you guys for everything you do every day, and for coming on today to our lunch hour. It was a really interesting conversation.
Thanks for having us. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, your work is also so important, and everyone watching, thanks for your input as well, and the work that I know everyone is doing around this.
Yep. All right, and we're going to keep chugging along and bringing you more stuff. So thanks so much, everyone, and enjoy your lunch. Bye.
See ya.